Chapter 11. "What smells so good?" asked Jud the next morning. Andy smelled it too. A lovely, woodsy perfume filled all the air. "It must be the lean-to," he said. "It smells stronger over here by it." They went inside the lean-to. Sure enough, the odor came from the boughs on the roof. Never had they smelled anything so pleasant. "Let's get more boughs and make a bed of them on the floor, so we can stay in here lots," Andy said. And so the campers went to work. First, they put 4 poles around the edge of the lean-to on the inside to keep the boughs from scattering. Then they started at one end and laid a row of balsam bombs across it, pointing the tips of the twigs toward the end. Then they put down the second layer, layering the tips of the twigs over the butt ends of the first layer. They kept this up, putting down layer after layer until the whole bed was covered. "Boy, this is swell," said Andy as he threw himself down on the finished bed. "Best of all is the smell." The boys were glad when Dad came up that evening. "Did you ever smell anything so good, Dad?" asked Jud. "What is it?" "It's the balsam boughs," said Dad. "Balsam is the most fragrant thing in the wood. Everybody loves it. The more sun shines on the boughs and the drier they get, the more odor they give out. The lean-to will smell better every day from now on. Lots of people fill pillows with balsam because it smells so good." Chapter 12. "Where is the bacon?" yelled Andy before breakfast the next morning. "Where did you leave it?" "You took it when Dad brought it in last night," replied Jud. "I put it in the lean-to, but it isn't there now." They looked in the spring box, but no bacon was there. They hunted and hunted. It wasn't anywhere. They were waiting for Dad when he came over the hill with a pail of drinking water. "Dad, someone stole our bacon! The whole package of it that you brought us last night!" yelled Jud. They showed Dad where they had left it. "Somebody stole your bacon, all right," agreed Dad. "You had a visitor last night when you were asleep. Now the question is, who was he?" Dad looked all around on the ground for tracks. "Here's a footprint," he said as he pointed to the ground. Sure enough, there was a print of a big paw in the soft dirt. "It was an animal!" exclaimed Andy in surprise. "A wolf?" cried Jud. "There are no wolves around here," said Dad. "Although this track does look like a wolf's. It's a big dog. I'll bet it was that big hound from Madison's farm up the road." Andy was angry. "I wish he'd come down here again. I'd fix him," he said as he picked up the haversack in which they kept their groceries and carried it over to the fire. "Hey, you're spilling the sugar!" cried Jud. Andy looked down at the haversack. Sure enough, there was a stream of sugar running out the bottom of it. He turned the sack upside down. There was a hole in the bottom, about the size of a silver dollar. "That dog tore our haversack open too." "No, a dog wouldn't chew through that little hole," said Dad. "I think you've had another visitor. That hole was chewed by a mouse, or more probably a squirrel." Jud looked at Andy. "I told you so," he cried. "I told you that squirrel was singing his war song." Just then, they heard the squirrel again from the top of the big oak tree. "He's singing his war song again," said Jud. "He is still mad because we're on his hunting ground. He's going to cause us more trouble." "Yes, I think he will," said Dad. "And I think that hound dog will be back to see you again, too. We have to make a cache." "What's a cache?" asked Jud. "A cache is a hiding place for food, usually up in the air where the animals can't reach it. You can't just leave food on the ground when you're camping. When I was camping out on the western prairies, a horse tore open my pack and scattered all of my food. And once when I was camping up in the North Woods, a bear went right in my tent and stole my bacon and ham. He wrecked the whole camp hunting for more." "Phew, boy, I'm glad I wasn't there," said Andy. "I'd be scared stiff if bears were around." "No, none of the wild animals will hurt you if you leave them alone," said Dad. "But they will get your food. We'll make a cache and fool that dog and squirrel next time." Chapter 13. "Let's get busy right away and hide the food before that dog comes back," said Andy. "We don't need to hide it," said Dad. "We've just got to get it up in the air." "Let's put it plenty high up," said Andy. "That dog is awfully big. He's got big paws anyway." Dad cut a long pole and rested it on the branches between two trees. It was about 10 feet above the ground. To get it up, he shoved one end over the branch of one tree and then lifted the other end with a forked stick and shoved it over the branch of the other. That's our cache pole. "But how are we going to get up to it?" "You won't have to. I'll show you," said Dad. He tied the end of the rope of the haversack containing the groceries. He threw the other end of the rope over the pole and pulled the haversack up until it almost touched the pole. Then he tied the end of the rope to the tree to hold it there. "That's pretty clever," said Jud. "All we have to do is untie this rope and let it down whenever we want." They put all the groceries in the haversack, except the canned goods and the meat. It's a good thing that dog can't get into canned goods, or we'd have to hide them too. "Don't think they can't," replied Dad. "A hungry dog will run off with a can any time. His jaws are so strong he can punch holes right through that can and suck out the food. I've had that happen often, but we'll fix them." He tied 2 poles between 2 trees, one either side of the tree trunks. The poles were exactly the same height from the ground, making kind of a platform. Then he put the canned goods in a box and set it on poles. He put the poles just high enough so that Jud and Andy could shove the box up on them. "Maybe the dog can jump that high," said Jud. "He probably could jump and touch the box, but he'd have trouble getting down," said Dad. "What about the meat? We've got everything hidden but the meat, and that's the most important," said Andy. "The spring box, that's the place for the meat," said Jud. "Right," replied Dad. "No dog can get into the spring box, but to be safe, you want to keep some rocks on the top of that lid." The next time Dad came out, he brought a wooden box with shelves in it and tied it up upon the catch pole beside the haversack. He put the dishes, salt, pepper shakers, and a lot of little things in it. "Now we've got a cupboard too," said Dad, "and one that the dogs won't get into either." Chapter 14. It was Saturday afternoon, and Dad had come out to spend the night and Sunday with them. He brought some steak for lunch. "Let's cook it without utensils, like the real campers do," said Jud. "All you need to cook steak is a jackknife," said Dad. "We'll make some kebabs." They each got a green switch, about as thick as your little finger and as long as your arm. They peeled off the bark and sharpened the end. The steak they cut up into tiny chunks, a little smaller than a 50-cent piece. Then Dad sliced up some onions. The boys watched Dad string the meat on his stick. First, he shoved the pointed stick through a piece of meat. Then, a slice of onion. Then, another piece of meat, and so on until all the meat was on. Andy didn't like onions, so he just put meat on his. "Do you like your steak rare or well done?" asked Dad. "Well done," replied Andy. Then Leave a little space between the chunks of meat so they can get cooked all over. Jud, you like it rare, so shove the chunks close together on yours. They held the sticks over the hot coals of fire, turning them all the time to keep them from burning. While the steak was cooking, Dad made toast for everybody. He cut some switches a foot long and stuck a row of them in the ground, all around the fire. On each one, he stuck a piece of bread. Then he went ahead and roasted his kebab, paying no attention to the toast. When the bread was toasted on one side, he took it off the sticks and turned it around. The kebabs tasted so good that everyone wanted more, so Dad got out the rest of the steak. "Let's cook it a different way this time," he said. He cut it into pieces about the size of his hand. Then he got a forked stick and sharpened both ends of the fork. When he had shoved the sharpened points through the stick, it was held out flat and smooth. "It can't get off now," he said. "If you put it on a straight stick, you are apt to lose it right in the fire. The forks hold it on. We call this forked spit." When the boys made their forked sticks and cooked the steak, Dad said, "Which do you like better, steak a la kebab or steak a la forked spit?" "A la kebab," the campers yelled together. "Yes, it's kebabs for me every time too," said Dad. Jud asked Dad where he was going to sleep that night. Dad said, "In the lean-to. I think I'll get my bed ready now." "Boy, the mosquitoes will eat you alive," said Andy. "They won't get me. You wait and see." First, Dad laid his rubber poncho on the balsam bed in the lean-to and spread his blankets on top. Then he drove 4 sticks into the ground, one at each corner of his pillow. They were about a foot high. Over the top of these, he spread a piece of mosquito netting. "When I go to bed, I'll put a rock on each corner of the netting to keep it in place. Then the mosquitoes try to get in."